My name is Arman, and if I had known how quickly a life can disappear, I would have held on tighter to every normal moment I once had. Disclaimer: this is a fictional story created for entertainment purposes only. Any resemblance to real persons or events is purely coincidental. I was born into a wealthy family, or at least that is what people believed from the outside. Our house was large, our cars were expensive, and our name carried weight in business circles. My father was respected, my older brother was powerful, and my sister was admired for her lifestyle. Everyone thought I was lucky to be part of that family. But inside the house, I was treated differently. I was always the quiet one, the one who didn't understand business, the one who was told to stay out of important matters. Whenever decisions were made, I was not included. Whenever success was discussed, my name was never part of it. Slowly, I started to feel like I didn't belong there, even though I lived under the same roof. The worst part was not hatred. It was indifference. My presence didn't matter. If I spoke, they ignored me. If I tried to help, they mocked me. My brother often said I was living off their success, even though I tried multiple times to build something of my own. Nothing I did was ever enough for them. I still remember the exact day everything started to fall apart. It was a normal evening at first. The house was unusually quiet, but I didn't think much of it. My father had called a private meeting with my brother and sister. I was not invited, as usual. I stayed in my room, trying to focus on my own work. Small freelance tasks I did secretly to earn some independence. After that meeting, something changed. The atmosphere in the house became heavy. People stopped talking to me directly. My sister looked at me with strange eyes, as if she had already decided something about me. My brother avoided me completely, which was unusual because he normally enjoyed reminding me of my place. Later that night, I was called downstairs. My father was sitting in the main hall with my brother and sister standing beside him. Their expressions were cold, unreadable. I asked what was going on, but no one answered me at first. There was a long silence, like they were waiting for me to accept something I didn't even know yet. Then my brother spoke. He said there had been a serious issue in one of the company accounts, and my name was linked to it. I was shocked because I had no involvement in anything like that. I tried to explain, but he cut me off immediately. He said there was already evidence. My father didn't look at me while he spoke. That hurt more than anything. I felt trapped in a conversation where my truth didn't matter. I asked to see the proof. They refused. I asked who accused me. They said it was an internal decision. Everything felt planned, like the conclusion had already been decided before I even walked into the room. My sister finally spoke, her voice calm but sharp. She said maybe it was better if I stayed away from the family for some time, until things settled. I realized in that moment that this was not a temporary situation. This was not confusion. This was removal. I laughed once, thinking it was a misunderstanding, but no one laughed with me. No one even reacted. That silence confirmed everything. I was being pushed out. My father finally looked at me and said I should leave the house for my own good and return only when I understood responsibility. Those words felt rehearsed, like they had been prepared in advance. I tried one last time to defend myself, but my voice was weaker than their decision. I went upstairs to pack my things. My hands were shaking, not because I was afraid of leaving, but because I couldn't understand how quickly everything had changed. One moment I was part of a family. The next I was treated like a stranger. When I came back down with a small bag, the main gate was already open. A driver stood there without making eye contact. No one came to stop me. No one said goodbye. I looked back at the house one last time, expecting someone to call my name, to ask me to wait, to question what was happening. Instead, the gate started closing slowly behind me. My brother stood near the entrance, watching without expression. My sister turned away. My father was already gone from view. The sound of the gate locking echoed louder than anything I had ever heard. Outside, the air felt colder than usual. I stood there for a moment, thinking this must still be part of some misunderstanding that would be fixed in a few minutes. I tried calling my father, but my phone showed no response. I tried my brother, but the call was rejected instantly. That was the moment I realized I had been completely cut off. I started walking without knowing where I was going. The road outside our house was empty. The city lights looked the same, but everything felt different. My phone battery was low, my wallet had little cash, and my mind kept repeating the same thought over and over again. That this could not be real. That someone would eventually come back for me. That I would hear my name shouted from behind and be asked to return. But no voice came, no footsteps followed, and the distance between me and the house kept increasing until it disappeared behind the darkness, and I was left standing alone on the street with nowhere to go. And no one to call, and the night was just beginning to foot to hand. The streets were louder than I expected, not just with traffic or people, but with a kind of constant movement that never allowed silence to settle. I had nowhere to go, so I kept walking until my legs felt heavy and my thoughts became slower than my steps. Eventually, I stopped near a closed row of shops where a small light flickered above a shutter. I sat down there, trying to convince myself that this was temporary, that I would wake up tomorrow and everything would make sense again. But deep inside, I already knew something permanent had broken. The ground beneath me was cold, harder than I had ever imagined anything could be. Every sound made me alert. Every shadow felt like it could turn into danger. I held my small bag close, not because it had anything valuable inside, but because it was the only thing that still connected me to the life I had lost. I tried calling my father again, then my brother, but there was no response. After a while, I stopped trying because each failed call felt like another layer of rejection I couldn't handle. The first few days blurred together. I didn't know where to sleep properly, so I moved between different places depending on where I felt least visible. Sometimes I stayed near bus stations, sometimes behind buildings where security guards didn't notice me, and sometimes near mosques where I could rest quietly for a few hours before moving again. Hunger became something I learned to ignore at first, but eventually it became impossible to think about anything else. I started noticing food everywhere, in hands, in shops, in cars passing by, and each sight reminded me of what I no longer had access to. I tried to maintain dignity in the beginning. I avoided asking for help. I told myself I would find a way out quickly. But days turned into weeks, and my strength slowly started to fade. My clothes became dirty, my phone stopped working, and my reflection in shop windows became unfamiliar. I was no longer the person who had walked out of that house. I was someone else entirely. Someone the world passed by without noticing. One evening, while sitting near a small repair shop that was about to close, I met a man named Saeed. He noticed me trying to fix a broken charging cable I had found earlier. Instead of ignoring me like others, he asked if I knew anything about electronics. I hesitated before answering honestly that I used to study basic technical work in my free time. He looked at me for a moment, then handed me a small screwdriver and said I could help him if I wanted. That moment changed something inside me. For the first time since leaving my house, someone saw me as useful rather than invisible. Saeed didn't ask about my past or judge my appearance. He simply gave me small tasks at first, fixing simple devices, cleaning parts, learning how broken things could be restored with patience. I started spending more time in his small workshop, and in exchange, he allowed me to stay nearby and sometimes gave me leftover food. It was not charity in the way I feared. It was survival shared through respect. As weeks passed, I met other people living similar lives in different ways. There was an old man who slept near the same area every night. He had no fixed home but carried a calmness that made him seem stronger than most people who had everything. He taught me how to observe people carefully, how to read their behavior without them speaking, how to understand who might help and who might harm. He said the streets do not lie, but people do, and that lesson stayed with me longer than anything else. I began to adapt slowly. I learned where to find safe places, where to avoid trouble, and how to move without drawing attention. I stopped expecting help from my past and started focusing on the present. My identity shifted from someone who lost everything to someone who was learning how to survive without it. There were nights when I still broke down silently, thinking about my family, wondering how they could erase me so easily. But those moments became less frequent as reality forced me to stay alert. Survival doesn't allow long periods of grief. It replaces emotion with necessity. Saeed eventually trusted me enough to teach me more technical skills. I learned how to repair phones, small appliances, and later more complex systems. I didn't realize it at first, but every skill I learned was rebuilding something inside me that had been destroyed. Slowly, I started earning small amounts of money from fixing things for people in the area. It was not much, but it was the first time I felt any sense of control since losing my home. Months passed, and I stopped counting days. The streets that once felt terrifying became familiar. I knew their patterns, their dangers, and their hidden rules. I was still homeless, still carrying the weight of my past. But something inside me had started to change. I was no longer only surviving by accident. I was beginning to survive by understanding, learning, and adapting to a world that had once rejected me completely. 5 years passed in a way I can only describe as slow transformation. The person I was on the streets eventually stopped existing, not in a dramatic moment, but through thousands of small decisions, each one pushing me further away from my past and closer to something I didn't fully understand yet. I no longer introduced myself as Armin. That name belonged to a life that no longer accepted me, so I shortened everything to AR. Something that sounded neutral, forgettable, and safe. At first, I survived through small repair work. I fixed phones, charging ports, broken screens, and small electronics for shopkeepers in the area where I used to stay. Word spreads quickly in places where people depend on quick solutions, and soon I wasn't just fixing things for free meals. I started getting paid. It was small money at first. Barely enough to move forward, but it was consistent. And consistency was something I had never had before. I want you to tell me something in the comments. Which country are you watching this from? I really want to know where my story is reaching. Over time, I began to understand patterns. Not just in devices, but in people. I noticed how shop owners trusted reliability more than appearance, how customers returned to whoever solved their problems quickly, and how reputation formed quietly but powerfully. I stopped thinking like someone who had lost everything, and started thinking like someone who could rebuild systems from broken parts. One evening, a businessman came into the repair area with a damaged laptop. He was impatient, dressed well, and clearly used to control. While fixing his device, I noticed files and system structures that revealed he worked in financial consulting. I didn't say anything, but I understood something important in that moment. The world I had been excluded from was not unreachable. It was just layered behind information I had never been allowed to see before. That curiosity pushed me further. I started learning cybersecurity from secondhand books, online tutorials, and borrowed devices. I studied at night when the streets were quiet. I taught myself how systems communicated, how data moved, and how small vulnerabilities could affect large structures. It wasn't formal education, but it was focused, and focus can sometimes replace structure when survival is involved. Years passed like this. My skills became more refined, and so did my opportunities. I started helping small businesses secure their systems, then larger ones. Eventually, I was no longer seen as a street worker, but as a quiet technical consultant who solved problems others could not understand. The name AR started appearing in professional circles, always without background details, always without history attached. But I never forgot where I came from. I couldn't. It was embedded in everything I did. While others saw growth, I saw reconstruction. While others saw success, I saw preparation. During this time, I began quietly researching my family. At first, it was just curiosity. I wanted to know if they were still the same, if the empire they once controlled was still stable, if they ever mentioned me. What I discovered surprised me. Their business structure was still large, but cracks were forming. Investments had become unstable, internal disagreements were increasing, and decisions were no longer as precise as they once were. My father was still considered powerful, but age was affecting his control. My brother had taken a larger role in operations, but reports suggested increasing risk-taking and poor financial judgment. My sister, who once lived comfortably without responsibility, was now involved in social branding and image management, trying to maintain a lifestyle that required constant financial pressure. What struck me most was not their decline, but their silence about me. There was no trace of search, no attempt to reconnect, no sign that my disappearance had created lasting concern. It was as if I had been removed cleanly from their reality without disruption. That realization didn't create anger immediately. It created clarity. While they were dealing with internal instability, I was building external control. I invested carefully in small tech ventures, not as a visible owner, but through layered partnerships and indirect involvement. I learned how influence worked without visibility. I discovered that power in modern systems doesn't always come from ownership, but from access points. I also started analyzing their companies more deeply. Public data, financial reports, hiring patterns, expansion decisions. Everything told me the same thing. They were still standing, but not as firmly as they believed. There was overconfidence in their decisions, and overconfidence is often the beginning of collapse in structured systems. I did not rush anything. I understood that patience is more effective than force when dealing with systems built on reputation. I positioned myself quietly in areas that intersected with their business ecosystem. Technology vendors, data consultants, security advisors. Not directly linked, but indirectly connected enough to observe movements without being noticed. With each passing year, my distance from the street life grew, but my memory of it never faded. I still remembered Saeed's workshop, the old man's lessons, the nights where survival depended on silence rather than strength. Those experiences shaped how I operated in the professional world. I never made impulsive decisions. I never underestimated struggle. I never trusted appearances. Eventually, I reached a point where I was no longer just surviving or rebuilding. I was positioned. Not openly, not aggressively, but strategically embedded in systems that once seemed unreachable. I had become someone who could observe large structures from within their technical foundations without being detected. And somewhere within that silent progression, I began to understand that my past was no longer just something I escaped from, but something I could potentially respond to in ways that no one would expect or prepare for. I didn't return to their world the way most people would expect. There was no dramatic announcement, no confrontation at the gate, no sudden appearance in front of the family table. Instead, I entered their system quietly, through layers they believed were too technical, too complex, and too insignificant to ever matter. By the time they even had a chance to notice anything unusual, I was already inside the structure that supported everything they built. It started with small financial movements. Not large enough to raise alarms, but precise enough to create dependency. I began acquiring minor stakes in companies that indirectly supplied services to their business network. These were not headline investments. They were invisible connections, the kind of ownership that doesn't appear threatening until it suddenly becomes necessary for approval, access, or expansion. Each step was calculated, each move designed to remain under the radar while slowly increasing influence. At the same time, I observed their weaknesses. My brother had become overly aggressive in decision-making. He pushed for fast expansion without fully understanding long-term consequences. My father, though still respected, was no longer as sharp as before. He relied heavily on trust rather than verification. My sister focused more on maintaining image than understanding internal structure. The empire they controlled was still large, but it was no longer disciplined. That was the first crack I needed. I began working through digital infrastructure. Their companies relied heavily on outsourced technical systems, data handling services, and third-party security providers. Through carefully established professional identities, I positioned myself as a consultant in areas that intersected with these systems. Not directly inside their organization, but close enough to influence how information flowed between their internal networks and external vendors. Every interaction was subtle. A recommendation here, a security concern there, a system update suggestion, framed as routine optimization. Nothing that would raise suspicion individually, but together, they began shaping how their information environment functioned. They started trusting systems I had indirectly influenced, without ever knowing who was behind the improvements. At the same time, I started monitoring their financial behavior more closely. Their investments were becoming unstable. There were unexplained delays in returns, increasing reliance on credit restructuring, and growing pressure from external partners. I didn't create these problems directly, but I understood exactly how to position information so that existing weaknesses became more visible to others in their financial network. Then I made my first real move. It wasn't destruction. It was exposure. I introduced controlled signals into financial channels connected to their business partners. These signals weren't false information, but carefully timed data interpretations that highlighted risks already present in their system. Investors don't always need lies to panic. Sometimes they only need confirmation of their own fears. And in their case, fear already existed beneath the surface. The reaction was immediate but indirect. Meetings started getting delayed. Partners began asking more questions. Approval processes slowed down. My family didn't understand why things were changing so suddenly, but they felt it. My brother blamed competitors. My father blamed market instability. My sister assumed it was temporary pressure. None of them looked inward. That was when I realized how blind they had become to their own vulnerabilities. As pressure increased externally, I tightened my position internally. I expanded influence across more technical layers of their ecosystem: data verification services, cybersecurity audits, system maintenance contracts. Every layer I touched gave me more visibility into how decisions were made and how information traveled within their organization. Then I began isolating critical weak points, not by attacking systems, but by identifying dependencies. Every large business structure relies on certain external pillars that, if questioned, create hesitation. I didn't remove those pillars. I simply made them less reliable in the eyes of those who depended on them. The result was hesitation at decision-making levels, which is far more damaging than direct disruption. Their empire began to slow down. My brother grew frustrated. He couldn't understand why expansion plans were stalling. My father started attending more internal meetings, trying to regain control, but every solution seemed temporary. My sister focused on public image management, trying to maintain the appearance of stability while internal pressure increased. And still, none of them connected the pattern. Because I wasn't visible in any single place, I was distributed across systems, decisions, and dependencies. My presence was not an event, it was a structure. Then came the moment I decided to make them aware, without revealing myself directly. I sent a single encrypted message through a communication channel that only their internal executive network would recognize. It contained no threat, no demand, no instruction. Just a line that referred to something only I would have known from their past. Something personal enough to break through professional distance. You taught me how easily someone can be removed when they stop being useful. That message didn't carry my name, but it didn't need to. The reaction inside their system was immediate confusion, followed by fear. Internal discussions began. Security reviews were triggered. They tried to trace the source, but the structure I had built around my presence made it impossible to locate directly. That uncertainty did more damage than any financial pressure I had applied earlier. Because now, for the first time, they understood that someone was inside their world, observing, influencing, and responding in ways they couldn't control or predict. And I remained exactly where I wanted to be, unseen but fully aware of everything they were about to lose. They didn't find me easily. That was the first truth I understood about power. When people are desperate, they don't look for the right answers. They look for familiar ones. My family tried everything they knew. Private investigators, internal security teams, even old business contacts who once owed them favors. But every attempt led to dead ends because they were still thinking in the old way, searching for a person with a name, a face, a history they could recognize. I no longer existed in that form. By then, I had built something different. A quiet structure of work, reputation, and technical authority that didn't depend on identity exposure. I had a small office in a modest part of the city, far from luxury areas, far from anything connected to my past. It wasn't designed to impress. It was designed to function. Clients came in for cybersecurity consulting, system audits, and infrastructure reviews. They saw a professional who solved problems quickly and left no trace of chaos behind. They didn't know that the same person they were now searching for had already built the systems they were depending on. The first contact from my family came indirectly. Not a message from them, but through a third party. A financial intermediary who had worked with my father's company years ago. He requested a meeting on their behalf, saying the family was facing serious instability and needed expert help. The irony was not lost on me. They were now asking for help from a world they once refused to acknowledge I could belong to. I didn't respond immediately. I let time pass. Not out of emotion, but observation. I wanted to see how far they were willing to go before understanding the situation. Over the next few weeks, their condition worsened. Business partners pulled back. Internal disagreements became public within their organization. Assets were being liquidated quietly to prevent larger collapse. The empire they once controlled with confidence was now being managed with fear. Eventually, I agreed to the meeting, but under strict conditions. No family home, no public office, no emotional setting. A neutral space, a rented professional meeting room. They accepted without negotiation. That alone told me how much control they had already lost. When I entered the room, they were already there. My father looked older than I remembered, not just in age, but in presence. The confidence that once defined him was no longer visible. My brother sat stiffly, trying to maintain authority, but his eyes kept moving as if searching for control he couldn't find. My sister avoided looking directly at me at first, as if acknowledgement might confirm something she wasn't ready to accept. There was a long silence before anyone spoke. My father finally said my name, not as a question, but as recognition mixed with disbelief. My brother followed with a sharper tone, asking where I had been and what I had done. My sister said nothing, only looked at me as if trying to connect the person in front of her with the memory they had erased years ago. I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence settle, because silence often reveals more than explanation. Then I told them something simple. I said I hadn't disappeared. I had just stopped being where they expected me to exist. The conversation that followed was not emotional in the way they expected. There were no raised voices, no dramatic accusations. Instead, there was tension built on realization. They were not dealing with someone who returned for revenge in the traditional sense. They were dealing with someone who had already moved beyond needing their approval, apology, or fear. My brother tried to reassert control by offering authority, suggesting that whatever had happened in the past could be corrected if I helped stabilize the current crisis. He spoke as if I were still the same person who needed acceptance. That assumption alone revealed how little they understood the transformation that had taken place. My father attempted a different approach. He spoke about family, about unity, about how mistakes could be repaired if everyone chose to move forward. His words carried the weight of someone trying to rebuild emotional bridges that no longer had foundations. I listened without interruption because I needed to understand whether they truly saw what they had done or whether they were only reacting to consequences. My sister finally spoke in a quieter tone. She admitted they never expected me to survive outside their world, not in those words, but in the way she described the decision as something necessary at the time. That phrase told me everything. In their mind, what happened to me was not cruelty. It was a decision that simply removed inconvenience. That was the moment I understood something important. They were not only facing financial collapse, they were facing the return of consequences they had never emotionally processed. I didn't offer them immediate rescue. I didn't reject them either. I simply told them the situation was already in motion long before this meeting, and that what they were experiencing now was not sudden, but structured progression of earlier choices. Their reactions shifted from confidence to uncertainty. That uncertainty was the real turning point, because people who are used to control can tolerate loss, but not unpredictability. After the meeting ended, I left without making promises. They stayed behind, still trying to process what had just happened. I walked out knowing that whatever came next would not be decided by emotion or family history, but by systems already set in motion long before they realized I had returned into their world in a form they could no longer recognize or influence. My name is Emily Carter, and this is where my story reaches its final turning point. Everything you heard was not just about revenge. It was about survival, transformation, and the price of choices that can never truly be undone. Some people lose everything and never recover. Others lose everything and come back as something completely different. Before you leave, tell me in the comments what you think you would have done in my place. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Because sometimes, the ending is not about winning or losing. It's about what you become after everything is gone. And now, this is the end.